Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Answers on Eschatology. My name is Dan Derry, and I am the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. We are going to wrap up our study on Acts chapter 1, verses 9 to 11 this evening. And what I want to do is I want to basically give a brief summary of what we have discussed and what we've shown in the previous videos, and try to wrap this up by giving you a big picture perspective of what the prophecy of the second coming in Acts 1 was all about, okay? From a big picture perspective. Now, what we've demonstrated in the first couple of videos was that the Greek phrase hos tropos, translated in like manner or in just the same way, depending on what version of the scriptures you read from, we've shown you that that phrase can't be forced to mean exactly, specifically, in precisely the same way. It won't work. It contradicts other texts in the scriptures, and it's not meant to be pressed into that literal interpretation, as we've shown by comparing other texts that use that same Greek phrase, hos tropos. Okay? Next, after we demonstrated that, we showed you that the emphasis of Acts 1, 9 to 11 and the ascension of Christ was not on the physical body of Jesus. No one's denying that he ascended in a body. Of course he did. I would hope no one would ever deny that. But we showed you by comparing other ascension texts with Acts 1 that the emphasis was not on a body. See, one of the failures of our dispensational or premillennial brethren is concerning the second coming of the Lord in Acts 1 is that they don't take into consideration other texts that are parallel to Acts 1, 9 to 11, and that speak of the ascension of Jesus. See, here's the thing. They were told that as you've seen him go, so shall he return. So we need to consider seriously how they saw him go. And Acts 1, 9 to 11 is not the only text that talk about how Jesus ascended. Okay? And so we've shown you by comparing Acts 1, 9 to 11 with Luke 24, verses 26 and following, a parallel ascension text, and by comparing 1 Timothy 3:16, which is a commentary on the ascension. We demonstrated to you that once again, the emphasis of the ascension of Jesus was not his body, but it was his ascending in the cloud, in glory, and while blessing his disciples. The emphasis was his ascension in the Shekinah glory cloud while blessing his disciples. And as he left, as they saw him leave, with those elements present, so shall he return. So was he to return. And we showed you that all of those three elements, the cloud, the glory, and the blessing, were prophesied elsewhere in the New Testament to be present at the second coming of Jesus. Okay? But that's not it. All of those three elements would be present at the second coming of Jesus to be fulfilled in his own lifetime, in the lifetime of his first century generation, that is. Not his lifetime, obviously. He died and he ascended, but in the lifetime of his first century disciples. We showed you that the glory cloud, okay, that he ascended in, he prophesied to return in Mathew chapter 24, verse 30, and in 34 he promised that would be fulfilled within his disciples' generation. In Matthew 16, verse 27 and 28, he promised to return in glory to establish his kingdom before all of his generation died, before those who he was speaking to passed away. And we showed you that as he ascended in blessing, the expectation and the hope of the first century disciples and the first century church was that he would come again with salvation. Hebrews 9:28, that he would come again and consummate their redemption. Ephesians 1:13 and 14. And we showed you out of Luke chapter 21 that the coming of the Lord in the cloud with glory and to bring redemption, Luke 21, 27 and following, which would be accomplished in the first century generation. Luke 21, 31 and 32. Therefore, all of the elements, all of the emphasis that was placed on the ascension of Jesus in Acts chapter 1, Luke 24, and 1 Timothy 3:16, the glory, the cloud, and the blessing, were fulfilled and were present at his coming in the first century generation, at his second coming in AD 70. That's what we demonstrated thus far. And what I want to do in this video is wrap this all up. And I want to say this, that those elements, okay, the glory cloud and his coming in blessing spoke of his coming to establish his kingdom. And listen, as they saw him go, so were they to see him return. They saw him go in the cloud with glory, the glory cloud, while blessing his disciples. And listen, where was he going? You see, this is the overarching and the big picture view of, as you see him go, so shall he return. They saw him ascend in glory to receive his kingdom. Let's read a text. Go with me to Luke chapter 19, and watch this. Luke 19 and verses 11 to 12. While they were listening to these things, Jesus went on to tell a parable because he was near Jerusalem, and they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. So he said, a nobleman went to a distant country to receive a kingdom for himself and then return. We know this parable is about Jesus himself. He was going to receive his kingdom and return to judge those based on their faithfulness and their stewardship over the things that he had given them in his absence. Now, here's something we need to understand. They saw Jesus ascend into glory, ascend in the cloud to receive his kingdom. This is Acts chapter 2, okay? Acts chapter 2, we have Peter declaring that Jesus had ascended to be seated on the throne of David in fulfillment of Psalm 110, Psalm 2, and he was now ruling and reigning. He initiated his kingdom as king over Israel. This was the nobleman who had gone into the far country and received the kingdom. You see, this is how they saw him leave. This is the big picture of Acts chapter 2. They saw him leave, ascend to receive his kingdom in power, in glory, in the cloud. And what did he do? He received blessing. He received the sure mercies of David. He received his kingdom, all authority and power, and he was to return in the same manner, in just the same way. What does that mean? He was to return, to establish, to fully set up his kingdom. Like Jesus said in his parable in Luke 19, the nobleman was to go into a far country to receive a kingdom and to return. Well, he was to return to fully consummate and establish that kingdom and to bestow that kingdom upon the faithful who were waiting for him with his kingdom. Go with me to Luke chapter 21. I want to show you what Luke says, what Jesus said in Luke's account here. Luke 21, I've already alluded to this, but listen to this. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Verse 31, so also when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. In the next verse, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Jesus placed his return in glory, in power, and in the cloud to establish his kingdom in the lifetime of his disciples. A perfect fulfillment of Acts chapter 1, 9 to 11. He ascended to receive his kingdom, and just as he ascended in the glory cloud while blessing his disciples, Luke says he would return to establish that kingdom in glory and in blessing, bringing their redemption. Go with me now to Hebrews chapter 12, and I want to show you the context and the exact time frame that this would take place. Hebrews 12, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to read verses 26 to 28, but Hebrews, the entire book of Hebrews is a contrast between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant worlds. The Old Covenant Mosaic economy, that world was fading away. It was giving way to the New Covenant kingdom of Jesus Christ, and the culmination of Paul's treatise, his last plea to Israel to enter their inheritance, is kind of summed up here in Hebrews 12, 26 to 28. Watch this. His voice shook the earth then, but now, not now, then, now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also heaven. This expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things that can be shaken. That's the removing of the old covenant world, as of created things, so that those things that cannot be shaken may remain. That's the new covenant world. Therefore, we receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. This is Paul's point. They were receiving the unshakable kingdom of God through the establishment of the new covenant world and the removal of the old covenant kingdom, that old covenant world of Judaism. This is the fulfillment. This is the absolute final consummative fulfillment of Acts chapter 1, 9 to 11. As they saw him go, he was to return. They saw him leave to receive a kingdom. And Paul, Jesus, and all the New Testament writers place the coming of the Lord to fully establish that kingdom in the lifetime of his first century disciples. And Paul places that kingdom that they were at that time receiving to be fully established at the removal of the old covenant world. And that took place at the destruction of Jerusalem, the eradication of that old covenant and the old covenant people in AD 70. That's what Acts chapter 1, 9 to 11 is all about. As they saw him go, so he was to return. They saw him ascend in the cloud of glory to receive his kingdom, to initiate the kingdom. He did that. And that was preached as fulfilled at the day of Pentecost. And for 40 years, they waited for the consummation of that kingdom. And that took place. That kingdom was consummated at his coming in AD 70. Acts 1, ladies and gentlemen, is not in our future. It was fulfilled in the first century generation. And Jesus didn't come in a body. He came in a covenantal presence, the parousia of the Lord. He came in the glory of his Father. He descended. He divested himself of the glory that he shared with his Father in his first coming, in his incarnation. He died upon the cross. He redeemed man. He ascended and he rejoined his Father in that glory. And he came again in the glory of the Father, in the Shekinah presence, to restore Israel, to give them their everlasting inheritance. And because he has fulfilled his promises to his covenant people, me, a Gentile, by birth, can enter into that covenant nation by faith and receive his grace, his forgiveness, and his mercy and his love in his kingdom today. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time. We'll see you next time. And next time, we'll be looking at Matthew chapter 24 once again. Bye for now.